You're now listening to All Hog Sports, covering all Arkansas Razorback sports, such as football, basketball, baseball, and much more. Now, here's your host for today's show, Sam Stimson.
The Arkansas Razorbacks are looking to rebound after their loss at Texas A&M. They play the Tennessee Volunteers at home, and we'll talk about that in today's episode. But first, if you like what you're hearing, make sure to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at All Hog Sports Pod. You can find all ways to listen and all social medias at my website, allhogsports.com. And please share the show, leave a 5-star review, and subscribe or follow, depending on where you're listening. But kicking it off with the game day information, we have another night game here, 6:30 on November 7th at Fayetteville, Arkansas, Donald W. Reynolds Beck Stadium. And it is going to be on SEC Network, and this is going to be on there no matter what, because I know the last few games they've gone from SEC Network to ESPN, and I've kind of said SEC, and then it got moved to ESPN after I recorded the show, so it's going to be on SEC Network no matter what, and there's also going to be nice weather. It's going to be 71 degrees and partly cloudy for this matchup, and it should be a good one. But kicking it off with your Arkansas Razorbacks, the offense basically needs to just back up what they did this last game against Texas A&M. The offense was finally efficient and was performing good against A&M, and if they do that now, I think they'll be pretty good to go against this Volunteers team. Razorbacks are averaging 24.6 points per game with 3,690 yards per game as well. But the main thing is there just needs to be better offensive line play. Texas A&M recording 4 sacks against the Razorbacks, and the one thing with this offensive line is that it's a little bit harder because the guys weren't that good under Chad Morris, as he got a lot of those guys' weight levels like below 300 because that's what he believed in, and it didn't work out for us at all. I mean, you look at last year's team, it wasn't good, so I think there's a ways to go with this offensive line, but the offensive line basically just needs to hold up in passing situations because as we saw on Saturday, Franks had to run everywhere. He ran 16 times just to get around, and the fact that the offensive line just wasn't holding up didn't help him at all. So if the offensive line can hold up, you can get some running game going, which we saw against A&M, but then we can also get more of a passing game going as Franks is able to stay in that pocket a little bit longer and get a better throw. But the rushing game basically is just going to have to continue to run with Rakeem Boyd. Rakeem Boyd is fully healthy after his ankle injury, and he showed that last game, putting up 100 yards. But total, this team is averaging 126 yards per game. Traylon Smith was the guy who stepped up for the injured Boyd, but Boyd has 51 carries for 188 yards with 2 touchdowns. And I also think Franks is going to have a couple design QB runs, and he's going to scramble around. He's had 58 carries, 456 yards, and the worst thing for him has probably been the turf monsters. They've been kind of getting to him, so for him basically to just get a cleaner run game, you just got to be able to not get caught up in the turf, and, it's hard to do that when you're playing football at a fast pace. But the Felipe Franks to Treylon Burks connection is going to have to continue to work. This has been solid for both of these guys all year. Burks has 26 catches for 366 yards and 4 touchdowns with 2 really impressive catches in the end zone, and I think Treylon Burks is just one of the greatest wide receivers I've seen on this Razorback team in a long time. It's important to get him the ball when he's open in certain scenarios, but Felipe Franks has been playing a lot, and I think he is playing so good that he's not receiving the validation that he should be. He's definitely putting himself up there in a spot where he could get drafted in the NFL. He has 1,213 yards, and he's averaging 243.200 yards per game. Both of those stats very impressive for the grad transfer from Florida. However, he has 11 touchdowns with 3 interceptions. Very good ratio there. And he's been able to hold on to the ball really, really good lately and minimize any interceptions, which is something that is really good for this offense if you're not turning over the ball. So I definitely think getting Franks to work with Burks as they have been all year is going to have to be something that this Razorback offense is going to have to continue to do. But a couple other guys to watch out for, Hudson Henry, I think could step into a emerging role as a tight end 1. Obviously, the other wide receivers, Warren and Woods, and possibly get Trey Knox worked back into the offense. He's kind of had a little bit of a sophomore slump, and I think it's important to see the talent that he has on the team as you definitely don't want to lose that talent if he's not getting the reps that he needs or wants here. But there's really not much to work on for this offense except for the offensive line, which is a really good thing to say, as I've been a little more critical in the past because this offense wasn't as good. But versus Texas A&M, I think they solved a lot of problems, and sure, that bye week helped them do that too. However, defensive rebound is much needed for this Razorback defense. They are allowing 28.8 points per game with 423 yards per game, and that yards per game number is not good at all, as 245 of them are in the air, which is pretty good, but 178 are on the ground. The rushing defense has to improve, as last week it didn't. Isaiah Spiller just ran over all the Hogs. But I mean, you got to give credit where it's due to Texas A&M's offense, which I talked about in the last episode, so if you haven't listened to that, I would encourage you to go listen to that, because it'll kind of explain my thought process on this defense and offense because of how good Texas A&M is. But anyway, this team's averaging 2 interceptions per game. Now, I'm sure 6 interceptions against Ole Miss helped a lot, but regardless, that's the stat. And they weren't able to create any turnovers or sacks versus Texas A&M, which I think is the main reason they struggled, along with Jalen Catalan being disqualified because of a targeting penalty. The redshirt freshman is definitely a leader on the team, even at such a young age with not that much experience. But I think a couple times you would be like, oh, he would be the guy covering there, and it hurts to not have him. So I think getting him back will be very helpful. I also think linebacker Grant Morgan going to have to keep getting tackles and doing what he's been doing all season. Now, he only has one working arm right now, which definitely makes it a little harder for him. But I mean, just for him to get some tackles, make some plays is going to be nice for the Razorbacks. Same thing with linebacker Bumper Pool, who has 50 tackles and was out in the Ole Miss game. So both of those guys are going to be all over the field making tackles, as I would expect them to, because they've been doing that all season. But it's going to be nice to have Catalan back. But Catalan, the defensive back, has 46 tackles, and he was disqualified in the first quarter of the game against Texas A&M, so he doesn't have as much tackles as the other guys, which makes sense. But he has 1 interception and a fumble recovery. He was a beast on the goal line, getting a stop against Ole Miss a few weeks ago, so I think getting him back will be a lot easier, and he's also a really good leader on this team. I think another interesting situation is to see how Hudson Clark rebounds. Hudson Clark played good against Mississippi State. He played all right against Auburn, didn't really do too hot. But then against Ole Miss, he had a great game. The former walk-on getting 3 interceptions. Well, I guess he's still a walk-on, but anyway, he got 3 interceptions, and it was a beast. So is it going to be a one-game wonder for him, or is he going to continue to play at that elite level? I think this game is going to be really telling for that, and I wouldn't put it past the kid because of how good he played against Ole Miss. He got 4 targets, allowed 1 catch, and got 3 interceptions. So he's a beast all over the field. He's got 23 tackles, and I think it'll be interesting to see how he plays, as he's going to be playing at the other spot at cornerback, as Jerry Jacobs opted out for the season. Anyway, I think he would have got that starting job, but it should be interesting to see how he plays, and is he going to be the guy, or is he just that one-hit wonder? It should be a big game for him. And then Monteric Brown is going to have to play a little bit better. He really didn't play that good against Texas A&M after his injury, and sure, that could be because of his injury, but he's still going to have to play at a better level because you want to have 2 really good corners in Brown and Clark. And then we also have to create pressure up front. That's something that didn't happen versus Texas A&M, as they got 0 sacks and were only rushing 3, and that just did not seem to work at all. Texas A&M's offensive line was just dominating those guys all game, so I think for them to create pressure up front is one of the things that they're going to have to do if they want to win this game. Special teams, though, has to improve again. I wouldn't call it a bounce back because of how poor this position has been all year. AJ Reed, though, was going to have a bounce back game because he's been playing really solid all year. He's 12 for 12 on extra points, and he's only missed 2 field goals, which happened to be 49 and 48 yarders last week. So he's going to have to bounce back after that game. However, it looks like Reed Bauer is going to be winning punter roulette. He's been the better punter on this team, so it makes sense. And I think a lot of the punting woes have kind of gone away for this Razorback team, as the team averages 35 yards per punt, but Bauer averages 44.2. So it makes sense to keep him out there. I also think this team won't return the ball at all, which is fine because really there's no need to. I mean, if you can't block properly and you're going to risk turning over the ball in a fumble, you might as well just not even bother with it. And I think teams kind of know that, so they're going to try to get a corner kick and run back there and stop the ball or kick it good on a kickoff. It's definitely not good for this team, but it's better than risking turnovers. And there just has to be better blocking for that to happen. And until we see that on possibly one return, I don't think it'll make sense to call that. And this is just the same old that I've been talking about the last few weeks, and I think it's going to apply again here against Tennessee. But I think it's not going to be as bad as like the Auburn game and possibly cost us the game. I just think it could hurt us in a little bit, but I think a lot of the woes are, kind of wore through. Now moving on to the Tennessee Volunteers. They are 2-3 on the year with wins against South Carolina and Mizzou. However, they have a loss to Alabama, Kentucky, and Georgia. They are averaging 22 points per game on offense, and they need an offensive rebound after their offense has looked really bad the last few games, averaging 323 yards per game, however. But their quarterback, Jarrett Guarantano, he has not looked good at all. 83 out of 135 with 6 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. And he's averaging 183 yards per game in the air. And it's just not looking good for him at all. He threw 2 pick sixes within the span of like 5 minutes against Kentucky, which basically put Kentucky up 14-0 early, and they didn't even have to do anything on offense. If you don't know much about Kentucky, their offense really isn't that good, but that's a different topic for later, as this is a preview of this matchup. But he hasn't been looking good these last few games at all. He has minus 0.3 rushing yards per season, which should make it easier for the Razorbacks. Because if you haven't seen, Arkansas struggles with dual threat quarterbacks. Because our rushing defense really isn't that good, and our pass rush defense isn't that good either. So when you get a situation where the quarterback kind of can just take off and run wherever, it's going to hurt this team a lot. Luckily, they're not going to have to worry about that at all. And I think he's going to turn over the ball and get at least like 1 interception. He's just too prone to be doing that against a good defense like Kentucky, and he seems to throw in situations where he shouldn't be. So I think it makes sense why I would say that the Razorbacks are going to pick him off once or twice. And that's definitely key for the Razorbacks to win the game, or Tennessee to win the game, that Tennessee has to not turn over the ball. But on the receiving end for the Volunteers, Josh Palmer, the main wide receiver, has 19 catches for 295 yards for 4 touchdowns. Watch out for him and Brandon Johnson, and also Eric Gray out of the backfield. However, Tennessee has a great offensive line with leading by Cade Mays. They have so many 5-stars on that line, very, very talented, which makes sense why they have a bit more of a running game than they do a passing game in comparison to each other. Now, they do average less yards per game, only 135, but they've been kind of mixing it between Eric Gray and Ty Chandler. Gray has 79 catches for 355 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he's a guy that I would expect Jarrett to throw the ball out of the backfield to, and it should make it a little bit easier for Jarrett because he may not throw the ball deep because of how Arkansas has forced turnovers all season, but Chandler has 62 carries for 275 yards for 2 touchdowns. Tennessee has to establish some type of running game, knowing how bad this Arkansas defense is against the run. Tennessee's defense hasn't looked too good all year. They only have 2 interceptions, one of those being a pick 6 from Henry To'o. But I think he's going to have a big game as he has 33 total tackles in that sack as well. He's a guy that the Razorbacks are going to have to watch out for, as I think he's one of those linebackers who are going to be all over the field making tackles on guys like Boyd, but also could be pairing up with a slot receiver. So it depends on who we throw in that slot, whether that be Mike Woods, but I think Woods could be due for a big game if To'o cannot counter him that well. It should be interesting for Woods, though, as he hasn't really had a big role in these offensive. Burks has taken up wide receiver 1, but I think as teams start to see how Burks plays, they're going to guard him a little bit better, which should allow Woods, Knox, and Warren to play better. But anyway, this defense has not looked that good for Tennessee. And in my opinion, they aren't a bad defensive unit. Like, I wouldn't sit here and rank them next to Bo Pelini and LSU's defense, but I wouldn't say they're like Kentucky or even Mississippi State, who has a better defense, or even Georgia. I wasn't even thinking of them. Definitely the best SEC defense there. And I think this defensive unit is good, but I just don't think They're going to be a big part